Lynne to introduce our speaker.
Good afternoon. Today it's my distinct pleasure to introduce our speaker, my colleague and friend, Lynne Platt. And by the way, much to my delight, Lynne and her husband, Judd Hamblett, have just recently moved to St. Pete, where I live, and are two of the newest members of the FSRA. So welcome. Lynne and I go way back to the 90s when she was a mid-level management officer and I was her CDO. As it turned out, Lynne was developing a passion for public affairs and soon would be changing to that cone, where she enjoyed considerable success in numerous posts and positions. But she didn't stop there. Over time, she branched out and became a true generalist, tackling all kinds of interesting assignments. For example, we next crossed paths in Baghdad in 2009, where she was the Deputy Director of the Office of Provincial Affairs, traveling to and overseeing the activities of our provincial reconstruction teams, PRTs, all over Iraq after the surge. And I was Deputy Management Counselor with a team of officers overseeing management issues at those PRTs. So we had a lot of overlap in our jobs. I think Lynne would agree, it was quite a ride. With the issues, the personalities, the sheer uniqueness of the mission, we often said, you can't make this stuff up. So Lynne continued broadening her generalist credentials in quite unusual ways. Now, of course, after a stint in Baghdad, one could pretty much write a ticket to Shangri-La for the follow-on assignment. So Lynne opted for Port-au-Prince as INL chief. Oh, and it was right at the time of the earthquake. So you see what I mean by true generalist. She then spent 3 years in Vancouver as consul general, earning her MC, and went on to a year-long fellowship at the Wilson Center's Canada Institute in Washington. So where, I asked Lynne, did this deep interest in space policy come from? Her answer was that she was, is a total geek, which may be true, but she also was responsible at the Wilson Center for organizing a large conference on US-Canada space cooperation, engaging luminaries such as the administrator of NASA, the executive director of the National Space Council, president of the Canadian Space Agency, and many other experts. Needless to say, it was a great success and pointed Lynne down, or should I say up, the path of space studies. Lynne has spoken before on this topic and has been diligently tweaking her remarks to keep up with the latest developments. She's even updated the title of her presentation. So I'm proud to introduce Lynne Platt with her Advances on the Final Frontier, Disruptions and New Directions in US Space Policy. Lynne?
Ellen, thank you very much for that. And I have to say that the one thing you didn't mention is the fact that once a management and housing officer, always a management and housing officer. And it's thanks to you that Judd and I are living here in St. Petersburg, and to your help in buying our house sight unseen, because we trusted you when you said this is the place for us. So from the bottom of my heart, thanks for that. And it's just great to be down here and able to hang out with you again. You know, it's not quite the same as Baghdadis there at the embassy in Iraq, but I think, you know, on the whole, I'd rather be here. So thanks again for the kind introduction and to the FSRA for the kind invitation to me. And Rebecca for her technical expertise in making this presentation possible. Now, Rebecca, how is it? Please remind me how I share my PowerPoint slides.
Okay, down at the bottom of your screen, there should be just slightly to the left of center, a button that says share screen.
All right, let me that I believe is up above.
That's right. Your screen is opposite of mine. Okay, so
Yeah.
sort of an up arrow in a
Okay,
green
share
box, hopefully.
screen. Yep.
Yep. Okay.
It says host disabled, attendee screen sharing. Okay, I guess that's what we want.
Okay. Wait, hang on one second. If that's true, let me fix that. All right, that should change.
Okay, I am now going to share my slide deck.
Perfect.
And it is coming up now.
All right.
Okay, so while that's opening, it's perfectly obvious from what Ellen said that I'm not a rocket scientist. And this being a Foreign Service group, there probably are one or two of you out there. We certainly had one when I worked in Vancouver, as someone who had worked at NASA. And there are probably more of you who worked on environment science and technology issues in the course of your careers. If we were in person, of course, we could call on your experiences by just asking you to, speak up at appropriate moments. But in this Zoom expertise, this Zoom format, I hope we can still tap that expertise. And so, feel free to type in your questions or your comments. And with that, it was quite a year, 2020. I think we can all agree on that. And looking at the activities, that we have been experiencing, the fractious political season continues, the most deadly pandemic in a century continues. But if we turn our attentions upward and look at the activities of human beings in space in 2020 and what we're expecting into 2021, I think that we're hopefully going to get a much bigger picture, and maybe one that's going to reignite our curiosity and wonder and sense of optimism. And so with that, let's get started. Now, I find generally that working from an outline of a talk is useful for me. And since I think of our time together as a journey, I think of this as kind of the roadmap to show where we're heading. So these are the topics I want to cover today.
The screen is not shared.
It's not shared. Okay. Let's see. How is and why is that the case? Share. Okay.
Okay, you started screen sharing.
Yeah.
All right.
Okay.
So you want to just hit start on the presentation? Start slideshow?
Okay, it says that I'm screen sharing, so.
But so go ahead and hit start your slideshow, and then it'll take the full screen instead of showing the rest of your computer.
Okay. I'm sorry, I'm looking for that.
If you go up to the top where it says home, insert, draw, design, go over to slideshow, and you can click start from there. Yeah.
Got it.
Play from start. There you go.
There
Awesome.
we go. Okay.
All right, everybody. Go ahead and click. Okay, thank you.
Okay, here we go. So this is the outline and the topics I wanted to cover today. So, I thought we could at least step through the first couple of topics and then check in with Ellen or Rebecca to see whether any questions have come in. And then we can pick things up again and talk about the next topics of political imperatives, big space, and disruptive influences, go on to new space and the billionaires, and then finish up with the advances on the final frontier. Let me just go back 1 second here. So it turns out that 2020 was actually a really important year for human space activity. There were a number of NASA missions announced and launches to explore the sun, launches to Mars, a touch and go on an asteroid, the 20th anniversary of the International Space Station. And there were a number of developments in commercial flight too. So I'd like to kind of do a 2020 highlight reel and then take a look at some of what we're expecting in 2021. In February of last year, the European Space Agency launched the Solar Orbiter. And this was a joint mission of European Space Agency with NASA, a really interesting partnership. And by July, they started sending back, the orbiter started sending back the first photos of solar campfires. And the European Space Agency has already started releasing some of that data. So it's data that's going to be analyzed by the scientific community and even the public and space geeks like me. The next thing that happened, I think that was really significant is the fact there were 3 missions to Mars launched last year. And the reason is because there's a phenomenon that only happens every 2 years where the orbits of of Earth and Mars are closest to one another. And in August and July and August, that's when that happened. And the shorter distance means less time and less power is needed to travel that 7-month journey to the red planet. So on July 19th, I mean, take a look. You can see that the United Arab Emirates launched their first Mars mission, and China also launched an orbiter, and the NASA Mars Perseverance launched in July. Now, these are pretty significant developments. I mean, first of all, this is the first time that an Arab country has launched an interplanetary mission. And although this was something that was done in collaboration with the University of Chicago, and they actually launched it from a launch pad in Japan, it was the rocket was built by Mitsubishi Heavy Industries. This is nonetheless reflecting the fact that UAE wants to be a serious player in interplanetary exploration in the future. And that's something I want to highlight later when I talk about recently signed accord, the Artemis Accords. So they are up there, they are on their way, and all 3 of these missions are expected to arrive on Mars in the month of February of this year. And so I think we're going to have a lot of data being sent back from these 3 missions by next month. In October of 2020, there was a lot of attention paid to this event, which was NASA's touch and go on the asteroid Bennu. Really interesting. They were supposed to gather 2 ounces of soil and surface material. And in fact, they picked up considerably more than that. And the mission will be continuing because it's a 7-year mission in total. But the asteroid, the mission actually launched 4 years ago. and it's not expected to return until 2023. And the asteroid, you know, as incredible as the photographs were, if you saw any of them, and this is a picture of the foot of the capsule touching down there, collecting, doing the collecting of the samples. It is actually 207 million miles away. So, you know, not a quick trip to get that material back here for analysis, but just remarkable what we were able to see when that asteroid touched down. And a little bit closer to Earth, just 254 miles away from us, is the International Space Station. On November 2nd, we commemorated the 20th anniversary of the ISS. This is a beautiful NASA photo from 2018. The International Space Station has come a long way since President Reagan, in his 1984 State of the Union address, directed NASA to build it, and to build it in 10 years' time. Pretty ambitious. It took about 4 years longer to get it off the ground, as it were. And then in November of 1998, the first segment of the space station launched, and it was on a Russian proton rocket, the Zarya. And then a month later, the first US-built component launched. And that was a space shuttle mission dedicated to hooking up with the Russian segment and beginning the assembly of the space station. 2 years later, in 2000, the first crew to reside on the space station arrived, and it was an international crew, 1 US astronaut and 2 cosmonauts. And then in 2001, the US module was added to the space station. And then 7 years later, the European Space Agency added their Columbus lab. Japan eventually added its Kibo laboratory. And then in 2011, unfortunately, US space flights ended. And so Soyuz rockets have been carrying crews back and forth to the space station pretty much since our flights ended in 2011. Fortunately, the SpaceX company, US commercial company, began carrying cargo in 2012. And this past year, they actually carried crew. And so a lot to celebrate, not only the 20th anniversary, but the fact that 2020 was the year that the US started actually running flights, not only cargo flights, but also crew flights to the space station. So a few facts on the 20th anniversary. 4 craft have delivered cargo to the space station. You can see them there. This is Russia's Progress space capsule. This is Japan's, this is the Japanese space exploration, and also the Cargo Dragon and the Northrop Grumman Cygnus have all delivered cargo. You can actually see the space station if the light is just right and if you know where you're looking, because it's orbiting the Earth 254 miles away. You know, 254 miles is pretty much the same distance as Orlando to Tallahassee, so it's not all that far away. And it's in fact so close that depending on, you know, time of day, launch conditions, and so forth, spacecraft can dock as soon as 4 hours after they launch from Earth. Looking back at the photo again, there's an acre of solar panels that are powering the space station. And I want to also note that the Canadian company that built the robotic arm, the CAN arm, you can see the arm right there attached to the space station. That company was based out in British Columbia. The space station was, as I said, bolted together, took 42 flights to get to that configuration that you see now. It's been visited over the years by 240 plus people from 19 countries. Experiments have been run there from over 100 countries. And there have been 230 spacewalks conducted by astronaut and cosmonaut teams. At any given time, there's an international crew of up to 6 people on the space shuttle. In terms of its, I mean, it basically has the crew capacity of a 6-bedroom house in terms of space room for the astronauts who are there. So that's a short highlight of some of the 2020 activities. And I think we can see further in 2021 the fruition of some of those things. We'll be seeing what happens in Mars. We're expecting that NASA in 2021 is going to be launching a Hubble space, or it's going to be launching rather the James Webb telescope, which is the successor to the Hubble, to gather information on the possibility of habitable planets. China is going to be allowing other international scientists to use its fast radio telescope in 2021. So there are a lot of other scientific exploration activities that are expected in this coming year. So that's a short list of activities in space and some of what we're expecting ahead in 2021. I can also recommend you to take a look at NASA's website, which is extraordinary. And a lot of those photographs that I had in there came out of their website. And really interesting material. It's one of the best government websites around. So with that, I want to turn to our next topic, which is to basically kind of lay out some terms of reference here: civil, commercial, and military space. And what do those terms mean for our consideration of this topic? So it turns out that these terms come from the 1958 National Aeronautics and Space Act. Pretty much from the passage of that act, it has been US policy to separate civil space, that is the realm of space exploration, and from commercial and money-making activities, and separate those two things from military operations in space. So in the civil sector, it's basically what happens when we're observing and understanding and modeling the Earth and the solar system and how it's changing, the causes of the change, the consequences of the change for human civilization. For example, the agencies that would be involved in doing that work would be NASA, NOAA, the National Oceanographic and Atmospheric Agency, the FAA, which among other responsibilities, the Federal Aviation Administration, it issues the permits and approvals for launches into space. Department of Energy has a role as well. And NOAA and NASA in particular, and the other civil space agencies have continuing innovative missions doing scientific research that's critical to monitoring changes here on our planet. Coming up in 2021, I think we're going to get a look back into perhaps even the beginning of time with that Webb telescope. So there's a lot happening in terms of the missions for 2021 for us to be able to better understand the origins of the solar system, to better understand changes here on Earth. So really exciting stuff. Now, commercial activity involves private entities putting their own capital at risk. Econ officers probably have a better understanding and can explain this far better than I can. But it involves goods and services. It involves services to consumers, not just to the US government. There are public-private partnerships. Over the years, there's been an evolution of satellite TV and radio and commercial communication satellites like Intelsat and SES Global and Eutelsat. But also, it's important to recognize the importance of the private-public partnership and the way that is changing how we approach human activity in space. And, you know, for example, I've listed a couple of things here: Planet, Blue Origin, SpaceX, Virgin Galactic as some players in that. Planet, I just want to pause here for a moment and underscore, they have been a pioneer in the area of throwing up smaller and smaller satellites. It used to be, we thought of satellites as, you know, things the size of a city bus. And now the satellites that are going up are more the size of a shoebox, which means that we can put a lot more of them up into orbit. And those are some of the things that are planned in the commercial sector for 2021. I've recently read that SpaceX intends to put up entire constellations of these things in order to improve broadband and internet for rural communities, which could be really exciting for all of us. So military and security space is the third sector I want to consider here. And with space-based capabilities pretty much considered indispensable to US military power and the ability to project power, security, economic prosperity, and so forth, the desired condition that the military has set out for space is to have a secure and stable and a secure and stable access to the space domain. And tasks there, of course, include deterring aggression, protecting US national interests, figuring out how to fight and possibly win future conflicts in space. And the key agencies, of course, DoD, National Geospatial Agency, the intelligence and security agencies. DoD in particular has been working to maintain space superiority and to preserve US freedom of operations in the space domain. They provide support to national joint and combined operations, and they seek to leverage and to bolster the thriving domestic, civil, and commercial space industries. And in the long run, the aim is to secure stability in space with allies and with partners, and maintain a presence in space to provide for safe, safety in space, and for peaceful uses of space as well. So DoD is involved in looking at internationally accepted standards of what constitutes responsible behavior of space, and supporting US leadership in space traffic management and in long-term stability of outer space activities. So I know that some of you are probably wondering about the Space Force. You've heard about it. What is it? Does it really exist? And the good news is, yes, the first new branch of the military created since 1947. The Space Force was actually came into existence in 2018. It had been starting to gain traction as early as 2016, certainly among members of Congress. And then in a 2018 speech, President Trump called for creation of a Space Force. And in the Defense Authorization Act of 2018, later that year, the Congress enacted basically the establishment of the Space Force as a separate branch of the military. So it went from Space Command, which is part of the Air Force, to now its own military branch, still under the Air Force, somewhat similar to the way that the Marines are still considered part of the Navy. So it is a separate branch of the military. And then subsequently, the White House Space Council published a directive in February of 2019 elaborating on what the Space Force's capabilities should be across a spectrum of conflict. It's the smallest branch of the military, only about 14,000 staff so far, and not expected to grow very quickly, but nonetheless, this gentleman has been named as the first head of the Space Force, General John J. Raymond, and he's already become something of a presence in terms of talking about the nature of the new service, the focus on digital literacy that's going to be required for the staff who are selected to staff it. Going to be talking about the role as an enabling force for other kinds of war fighting. And General Raymond actually met with the Biden transition team recently in December. And just this week, DoD announced that the new headquarters for the Space Force is going to be at the Redstone Arsenal in Huntsville, Alabama. Florida was under consideration for headquarters for the Space Force, the Cape Canaveral area, but ultimately it looks like Huntsville, Alabama beat out the Florida candidacy. And so that looks like where the building is going to take place for the headquarters. Now, military leaders have to do their work with an eye open to changes or anticipated changes in their environment. And among other tasks is the protection of DoD satellites and other US assets in space. So, you know, that very much is top of mind. And it turns out the US is not alone in taking steps to develop military capability in space. In 2019, NATO recognized that Russia and China were increasingly active in space. And so the alliance added space as its new fifth operational domain. And NATO also adopted its first overarching space policy. And then just last October, just a few months ago, head of a NATO ministerial meeting, Jens Stoltenberg, the Secretary General, announced that the alliance was going to be setting up a new Space Command Center in Ramstein. And so, you know, this is exciting news. They will be aimed at countering threats to satellite infrastructure in orbit. And specifically, it's interesting that Stoltenberg cited activity from Russia and China as nations that are developing anti-satellite systems that might blind or disable or shoot down satellites from allies and create dangerous debris in orbit. So, you know, it's very interesting to see kind of great power competition going into space as well. And hold on to that thought of great power competition later on when we wrap up this section after we wrap up this section on military space, we'll be talking about that later in terms of political imperatives. But with that, that kind of concludes the kind of opening sections of space, where we are now, and then laying out these terms of civil, commercial, and military space sectors. So I want to move on to, this is kind of a meaty part of the talk here on political imperatives and big space and disruptive influences. But I wonder if there are any questions that may have come in now, and I'm happy to take a few of those. Any questions?
Lynn, this is Rebecca. I'm monitoring and I don't see any questions as of yet.
Okay, fantastic. Let's march on.
All right.
Okay, so from the earliest days of the US space program, it was actually developed in response to foreign policy imperatives, I would submit. After all, we know that the United States wasn't really the first spacefaring nation. That distinction belonged to the old Soviet Union. And on October 4th of 1957, the USSR launched the first satellite, the Sputnik 1, into orbit. And it was both a huge scientific achievement as well as, at the time, seen as a big propaganda coup for communism and for the communist system. Initially, President Eisenhower and others in his administration were congratulating the Soviets, and they tried to downplay the importance of this achievement. But in doing that and having that reaction, they really misjudged the reaction of the American public, and they misread American public opinion. To the public, it was a shocking and galvanizing event, and it opened up evidence of a technology gap that between the democratic system, of the U.S. and the communist system. And to add further insult to injury, the Russians followed up a month later after launching Sputnik 1 with the launch of Sputnik 2 by throwing Laika, essentially a rescue dog, into orbit aboard Sputnik 2. And that was later named Mutnik by some wags in the US space community. But the public just reacted with outrage and even fear. Certainly the Democrats seized on this and used it to blast Eisenhower for going golfing while his administration did nothing about Soviet technological advances and these representations of superior technology in the hands of the communists. So there was initially a US failure on the launch pad in 1957, December of that year, when the US Army put together, then the US Army responded by putting together a project very quickly. And this was done thanks to Wernher von Braun. And on January 31st, 1958, we launched the Explorer 1, which was the first US satellite that went into, that went up, launched by the United States. The administration then drafted legislation to create a new agency that would be in charge of planning and directing and conducting aeronautical and space activity. And the National Aeronautics and Space Act was signed into law in July of 1958, and NASA opened for business in October of that year. So, these are these are, some of the other things that happened subsequently. In 1961, Yuri Gagarin and Titov were in orbit. We threw up Alan Shepard and Gus Grissom into suborbital flights. Finally, in 1962, John Glenn and Scott Carpenter went into orbit. And that was also the year that President Kennedy made his famous address at Rice University, talking about the fact that the United States would go to the moon in this century, and really kind of laying out what would become both inspirational and aspirational, and a roadmap for the activities of NASA. And finally, we did get to the moon, Apollo 11, July 20th, 1969. Now, the job of helping the US government realize these national aspirations in space, for the most part, has been dominated by a handful of aerospace companies. These are household names that over the past 30, 40, 50 years have received billions from the US government in cost plus contracts. Those of you out there who were or had contracting warrants during your career know how those things work. You get paid even if you go over budget or you get behind schedule. I think there's some justification for arguing that over the decades, political imperatives of our country enabled the dominion of these companies and allowed them to dominate their industries until they got bigger and richer and were able to gobble up smaller competitors that came along, thus minimizing competition. Now, admittedly, there's an argument to be made on the other side that they had, very specialized kinds of skills, that there were security clearances that were necessary and involved. But it does set up for, some years later, some discussion about just how competitive our space industries were. So going back to, sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself here. Going back to this role of government versus the private sector, and I just want to remind ourselves here of President Reagan's criticism of big government, and the old line about government isn't the solution, it's part of the problem. And then continuing into the 1990s, we saw a period of questioning about the role of government, and the role of government particularly versus the private sector. And then remember in the 1990s, Vice President Gore headed up that reinvention of government initiative. There were a lot of questions that were raised about whether government was the most efficient way of dealing with problems, whether US government budgets, cost overruns for big government projects, needed to be halted, whether the private sector was actually more streamlined and more efficient. Were there functions that could only be done by government? Remember the issue about things that were inherently governmental versus things that could be given to the private sector to more efficiently handle, whether those things could be outsourced. So this search for creative and lower cost solutions meant opening up opportunities for new companies, and that increased competition for work in outer space. And continuing into the George W. Bush administration, there was a realization that the space shuttle was going to be retired by 2011. This was in response to the commission that had looked into the space shuttle accidents, and the decision was made in 2006 that NASA needed to find a way to be able to go back and forth to the space station. Otherwise, we would have to depend on Russia, the only other country that was traveling up there regularly, to get back and forth to the space station. So NASA announced in 2006 something called the Commercial Orbital Transport Services Program, the COTS program. And the thinking was that some functions, like cargo delivery, could in fact be outsourced so that NASA could concentrate on that inherently governmental piece, which was the space exploration strategies and basically ability to maintain a U.S. presence and to maintain a U.S. superiority in space. Now, at that time, the NASA administrator, Michael Griffin, set aside $500 million from the NASA budget. That was seed money for some companies to develop rockets that could transport cargo into the International Space Station. And that amount was pretty small potatoes. It wasn't really enough so that it would support the development of an entire, project by a particular company, but it was sort of seed money. So the companies would have to put some skin in the game and get their own funding or get some investors. And it turns out that by the year 2006, SpaceX, then a company of only 80 people, won a $278 million chunk of the COTS program contracts. That was the first time that a NASA contract had been won by a company that small. And it's the first NASA contract and a huge stamp of approval, essentially, for Elon Musk's company. And what's interesting was that these contracts for COTS were not cost-plus contracts. The contract essentially said that SpaceX wouldn't get paid if it failed to meet milestones. So what's interesting was that those big space companies like Boeing and Lockheed Martin, to them, this was small potatoes. But to a small company like SpaceX, it was a huge opening and they took advantage of it. Elon Musk at the time was quoted as saying, "Look, Boeing doesn't get out of bed for anything less than $1 billion." And even the NASA administrator, Michael Griffin, would later say that he too was very surprised that this was a textbook example where, and that a business school would later study where a consumer or a customer rather, like NASA, was moving in a new direction. And the traditional big space companies weren't nimble enough to move with what the customer wanted. So this happened under President George W. Bush. If he, in that period, kind of cracked open the door a bit for new aerospace companies, then certainly President Obama, in his term in office, flung it wide open. Christian Davenport, who's the Washington Post columnist on space, in particular, brought attention to this in his article that I've cited here. But Obama himself published an op-ed about his administration's goal of sending humans to Mars by the 2030s and being able to return them safely to Earth, with the ultimate ambition of one day being able to remain there for an extended period of time. But in that article, he said that getting to Mars will require continued cooperation between the government and private innovators. And as Christian Davenport said, Mars remained years, if not decades away, but Obama's true legacy was really the standing up of a commercial space industry that would end the government's monopoly on space. So while the Trump administration actually reversed the Obama decision not to return to the moon, but instead to go straight to Mars, that Obama wrote about in that op-ed, Trump continued in the direction of opening up contracts to smaller companies. And he also, I think very significantly, President Trump revived and reinvigorated the White House Space Council that had been pretty much moribund since George Bush's presidency, George Bush 41. So here you see a list of some of the activities of the White House Space Council. Some of their directives. They published 6 directives in the last 3 years. I mean, a couple of them are really significant. This is, talking about going back to the moon, establishing the moon as a base from which to launch interplanetary exploration. This one is also significant in terms of establishment of the U.S. Space Force and the principles for their operations across the spectrum of conflict, and even this national security, this national strategy rather for space, nuclear power, and propulsion. Essentially talking about the systems that would power spacecraft when solar and chemical power sources prove to be inadequate. So I think it's important to touch on another foreign policy achievement of the Trump administration. This was driven by NASA, and it came only a couple of months ago. These are the Artemis Accords. The Artemis program is the name given to the program that's going to send the first woman and the next man to the moon. And the Artemis Accords were signed between the US and 7 partner nations, essentially to kind of build a coalition, is the way that I would put this, and kind of establish a group of partners, trusted partners, to implement the 1967 Treaty on the Principles Governing the Activities of Space in the Exploration and Use of Outer Space. And this Outer Space Treaty, which and the Outer Space Treaty that they commit to, also reinforces the agreements on registration of space material, rescue of astronauts, and other norms of behavior in space that NASA and our partners are supporting. So fundamentally, I think this is important, not only because of the coalition, but because it underscores that although we go into space exploration, we are fundamentally wanting to avoid conflict in space and on Earth by strengthening mutual understanding and reducing misperceptions. Mike Gold, who at that time was the NASA acting administrator for international and interagency relations, talked about the fact that Artemis is a journey to the moon, but as far as he saw it, the destination of the Artemis Accords was really toward a peaceful and prosperous future for all nations, and in particular the signatories. So it was the Five Eyes country, the UK, US, UK, Canada, and Australia. So New Zealand wasn't included in that group, plus Italy, Japan, Luxembourg, and importantly here, given the fact that the UAE launched its first mission to Mars, the United Arab Emirates is in that group of signatories to the Artemis Accords. So now I want to move on and talk about big space and disruptive influences and new competition. Notwithstanding the initiatives of Presidents Obama and Trump, I would say that there have been disruptive influences on the role of the big space companies, starting at least since George Bush 43. And it was in September of 2008 when Elon Musk and SpaceX successfully launched Falcon 1 rocket into orbit. And what was remarkable about that launch was that they had designed and developed and tested the whole thing in-house. And from the ground up. There was no outsourcing. They didn't have help from other companies. So this was a really pretty small team of people, a pretty small company. And getting into orbit is a big deal. And what Musk said was, this really means a lot to SpaceX getting into orbit. It's a huge milestone. There are only a few countries that have done it. It's normally a country thing and not a company thing. It's an amazing achievement. So it's worth noting that Musk had sued NASA only 4 years earlier in 2004 for not allowing his company to bid on a sole source contract. You know, it's not always a great move to sue your potential customer, but he won that lawsuit, and then 4 years later, he landed his first NASA contract. And then here he is talking about, you know, already kind of presaging, if you will, this displacement of some of the big companies and moving them aside to make room for new competitions for a piece of the space market. So besides political imperatives, I think there are also some other disruptive influences and changing conditions. And I want to turn to those now. If I had to put a date on when we start seeing impacts from disruptive influences and changes in, you know, on big space, I would possibly go back to the year 2000. That was about the time that the word Google started to become a verb, right? And those trends were development and growth of a digital economy, electronics shrinking. You started hearing about nanotechnologies. Cost of access to space started decreasing, and there was a lot of private capital for innovation that started increasing. So unpacking these terms a little bit, the Bureau of Economic Analysis estimated that in 2017, the digital economy amounted to nearly 7% of US gross domestic product. $1.35 trillion of US GDP. And this segment of the economy grew approximately 10% per year from about 1998 to 2017. So 4 times faster growth than the overall growth for the US economy. So I think, you know, by any stretch of the imagination, this has been an important change in conditions and you know, creating the opportunity for disruption in big space. At the same time, you have miniaturization and the micro and nano technology. Sorry, I keep flipping this back. Micro and nanotechnologies and computers and other electronics smaller than ever. And people who own smartphones can now hold in their hand more computing power than NASA had when it sent the Apollo 11 mission to land on the moon. I mean, think about that. You know, you're holding in your hand, in this small thing, you've got more computing power than it took to actually land human beings on the surface of the moon. It's remarkable, and it continues. And at the same time, the costs of access to space are decreasing, right? Satellites, I said they used to be as big as buses. They're now the size of shoeboxes, and they weigh less, and they get launched in flocks. And they provide more and more precise imagery and data. And then finally, there's just a lot more private capital around for driving innovation efforts. And I want to talk more about this private capital phenomenon when we get to the next section on the space billionaires. So, but before we go on to that next section, I want to sort of pause on this slide because I think that it illustrates kind of what we've been talking about here. You know, from early days to how we got where we are, we've had political, social, and economic imperatives. We've had the civil, commercial, and military space sectors, and the key role that big space companies, Boeing, Lockheed Martin, the United Launch Alliance, and Northrop Grumman have played in terms of being able to help the United States realize our ambitions in space and to bolster our civil, commercial, and military sectors. Then this period of digital economy increases, of miniaturization, lowering access to space, and increasing capital for innovation, exercising disruptive influences, and then eventually arriving to this last bit where you see essentially a sharing for a hybrid between big space and the new space companies. So I want to also credit a Canadian consultant, Michael Platte, for some of the ideas that are on this slide, particularly in terms of this transition from big space to new space. I've added, you know, a number of things here from the research that I've done, but I think that it really is a way of kind of encapsulating the changes that have been taking place. Space is hard, and you just ask anybody who's in the business. It takes a lot to slip the surly bonds, as the poet John McGee has said. It's a pretty unforgiving environment that awaits you once you get up there. So it's no wonder then that large and tested companies just dominated for so many years. And now there are entrepreneurs that are getting into the market themselves and increasingly sharing that market with between big space and new space. So now I want to turn to the billionaires, and I see these billionaires, the space billionaires, as really kind of ambassadors, if you will, for new space. I've referred to Christian Davenport, the Washington Post space correspondent, he not only continues to write for the Post, but he published in 2018 an incredible book called The Space Barons. And he's the, I think that he's really, looked at this phenomenon, he and Tim Fahrenholt, more closely than anyone else. And in both of their books, they talk about some of the billionaires who have been involved in space. And space has attracted some pretty interesting characters. Davenport in particular delves into the backgrounds of 3 billionaires in some detail: Richard Branson, Jeff Bezos, and Elon Musk. So Branson, with a net worth at less than $4 billion, he's kind of at the lower end of the billionaire continuum. But he decided years ago that he wanted to get into the space business. And even before he bought into it, he had other successful businesses. He had been in he'd been famously in the music business, in online banking, the railroad industry. He had an airline, and more than 200 other companies in total. He was also a legendary showman and really an adventurer who did long distance boat racing across the Atlantic. He famously even has done some hot air ballooning, coming close to losing his life. But he registered the name Virgin Galactic Airways some years ago. And finally, in 2004, he bought into Spaceship One technology, a rocket plane that was developed by a test pilot named Burt Rutan of Scaled Composites. Now, initially, Branson was promising spaceflight by 2007, but after the year 2004, when Spaceship One ended up snagging the prestigious Ansari X Prize, it suffered a number of setbacks. And finally, in 2019, it took until 2019 before Spaceship One's pilots made 2 successful trips into suborbital space. Unfortunately for them, in December of 2020, they had to abort a flight. So what's, I think, going to happen in 2021, Richard Branson, who's now 70, is trying to move things along so that he can make a trip himself. It's expected that Virgin Galactic is going to repeat the flight that had to be aborted in 2020. If that one is successful, and if they make one more successful flight after that, it'll finally be Branson's turn in orbit. And to date, he has sold something like $13 million worth of bookings on Virgin Galactic space flights. So, making money off of an opportunity to get into space that doesn't really exist yet. Very interesting. Far less of a showman and a show horse, and more of a workhorse, really, is Jeff Bezos. And he's been now the richest person in the world for about 3 years running. And he actually admits to having been enthralled by space from a very young age, like from 5 years old, when he and his grandparents watched the Apollo 11 moon landing. And his grandfather, Lawrence Geise, was an administrator at the Advanced Research Projects Agency, which later became DARPA. In 2000, so 20 years ago, Bezos founded a company called Blue Origins in Kent at the age of 36. And from its inception, the ethos of that company was as a patient, go slow approach, work approach, and really a lot of secrecy surrounding their work. Bezos would frequently not even announce the company's successes until a month or more afterwards. And he would do it on the company's internal blog. So here, however, is the Blue Origin website. And I point this out to you because this is what they say about reusability being the key to lowering the cost of space travel. Now, while Bezos has been fixated on a step-by-step approach, it's no surprise that the motto of the company is graditum feracitur, step by step ferociously. And they actually have, I have taken the slide out, but on their website, you can buy merchandise. Surprise, surprise from the head of Amazon, right? But you can buy Blue Origin merchandise that has their logo, it has their motto, and you know, you can have a backpack or a ball cap or a t-shirt available off of the website. So if Jeff Bezos is more like the tortoise, then as Chris Davenport makes the point in his book, Elon Musk is really like the hare in the race to space. Elon Musk, now the youngest of the three billionaires, 49. You know, Blue Origin, Jeff Bezos' company, discreet to the point of secrecy about its activities. But Elon Musk is very, very open, has been open about both his successes and his failures. And he's really a showman, much like Branson in that regard, even more brash. But I have to credit Musk, besides being, you know, just kind of a guy who's out there as a showman and a show off. He's also a deeply knowledgeable and very serious engineer, unlike either Branson or Bezos. And an interesting character, born in South Africa. Family is Canadian and South African. Bullied as a child, left at age 17 to attend Queen's University in Canada, and then transferred at the age of 19 to Penn. Graduated with degrees in both economics and physics, and went off to Stanford, but decided to take a gap year instead of going into a PhD program. And off he went to start a business based on the digital economy. And his first company was Zip2, which Compaq bought in 1999 for $307 million. And then his next company was the online bank, which later became PayPal. And that was bought by eBay for $1.7 billion in 2002. So that purchase, that sale of PayPal, gave Musk the money to start his his space exploration technologies company, SpaceX, at the age of 31. Kind of makes you look back on your own life, right? And wonder what you were doing at age 31. In any event, I want to just pause too. Here you see Musk walking with President Obama at pad number 40 at Cape Canaveral. Obama was there with Musk viewing the first successful launch, or viewing rather the Falcon 9 rocket facilities, which was launched successfully later that year. And Musk has been really very upfront about expressing his vision of making human beings an interplanetary species, and talking about his wanting to help build a colony on Mars. So this is from the SpaceX website. Some things here to point out. I think it's, you see here, I want to note, this is the Dragon capsule that has carried cargo and crew back and forth to the International Space Station. 23 launches in total, 22 visits to the space station. I also need to note that SpaceX has achieved some of the lowest payload costs in the entire space industry. The US space shuttle used to take things up into space to the tune of about $54,000 per kilogram. And now Elon Musk's SpaceX with its rockets is able to carry things into space for about $3,000 per kilogram. So, it's at about 1/20th of the cost of going up on the space shuttle. So what that means is that with lower payload costs, SpaceX is really becoming a go-to company for carrying more and more of commercial payloads that are going up from across the world. Although it hasn't received a lot of support, it's actually a pretty successful commercial venture worldwide. So now I'm bringing back this slide because I think it's worth noting that the billionaires come out of the digital economy and they come out of these disruptive forces. And I would also say that they've been shaped by them. The whole idea of these disruptions, the Silicon Valley idea of lowering barriers to access to products, and their experiences as entrepreneurs have given them access to capital, and it's capital that they can spend on R&D and innovation in their companies. I mean, Jeff Bezos, for example, it takes about $1 billion and has for several years taken about $1 billion out of his Amazon stock and put it into Blue Origin. So all of these entrepreneurs have had access to capital for their innovation, and therefore have relied less on those big contracts coming directly from US government entities. And they didn't get rich doing space like these big companies. In fact, they got rich so that they could do space separately. I mean, though space was an interest for them, separately. And, certainly from things that Bezos has said, from what Elon Musk has said and done, and from what Branson has said, essentially getting rich in the digital economy gave them money to do space. So that brings us to our final topic. And that is advances on the final frontier. And I just want to note what Richard Branson has said about that. We're at the vanguard of a new industry determined to pioneer 21st century spacecraft, which will open space up to everybody and change the world for good. I think it's really interesting that, as wealthy as these billionaires are, they see themselves as opening the space world up, as very much as democratizing space. While we're waiting for our tickets to the Virgin Galactic, on the Virgin Galactic space trips, I just want to note that space actually does have an impact on our lives. Some of the ways that space remains relevant to us daily It's not just about freeze-dried food or about that awful orange breakfast drink called Tang. So, you know, GPS navigation systems are ever more refined, something I certainly appreciate. Water filtration systems, wind turbines. Our firefighters have much better protective gear thanks to polymers that were developed during space exploration flights. Skiers, goggles filtering out light have been also developed thanks to NASA scientists' work. Weather forecasting, something that we all pay attention to, certainly in Florida, is incredibly accurate, certainly compared to where it was, you know, 30, 40 years ago. And even our cell phone cameras owe something to space exploration. Here in Florida, NASA has been important for Florida's economy. In FY 2019, Florida was in the top 8 states where NASA's economic impact was more than $1 billion. And according to NASA's own study of economic impact, Florida received economic input from NASA to the tune of about $6 billion and 34,000 NASA jobs. Aerospace is a big driver in Florida's economy, about $1 trillion economy in total, with about 175 billion of that in aerospace and aviation. And 2 of the active US spaceports are here in Florida. And launches are authorized from Florida sites. What to expect in terms of further advances? I think the Biden space policy, certainly coming out of the Democratic platform, very much views space as an engine of job creation. These are some of the things that the Democrats have said they'll do. They'll continue to support NASA, space exploration and discovery, presence on the International Space Station, return to the moon, and so forth. And there's also an awareness of the, on the military side, the importance of transforming our armed forces for the 21st century and maintaining our competitive edge. That is in the platform as well. Some of the specific things that we might expect to see in Biden foreign policy: climate change research missions are going to be reprioritized. Whereas in the Trump administration, they were leaning toward turning the International Space Station over to commercial companies, it appears that the Biden administration is likely to extend funding and the lifespan of the space station. It looks like there's going to be a more realistic timetable for the moon landing, so pushing out that timetable from 2024 to 2028. But there will very much be continued emphasis on commercial activity and private sector involvement. There's a lot of, it appears that a number of entities have been talking to the Biden administration about keeping the Space Force as a separate military branch. And I think we may well see the first woman administrator at the head of NASA. There are a couple of likely names there that have surfaced recently. So I want to, we've covered a lot of ground, and, you know, we've talked a lot about what space does for all of us in very practical and pragmatic terms. But I have to say that for me personally, with my interest in space, it's a lot more than just strategic necessity to have thoughtful space policy, or to make sure that we, are talking about the pragmatic benefits of scientific advances and exploration. I think that for the human race, space represents something deeply profound. That we have always looked to the heavens. So I want to leave with this, one of the iconic images of the 20th century, Earthrise, a photo that was taken on Christmas Eve by the Apollo 8 astronaut Bill Anders, who was orbiting the moon with his two crewmates. And what he said was, we saw the Earth rising over a battered gray lunar surface, small and delicate, a magnificent spot of color against the vast blackness of space. And once distant places appeared inseparably close, borders that once rendered division vanished. All of humanity appeared joined together on this glorious but fragile sphere. We set out to explore the moon, and instead we would discover the Earth. So with that thought, I think what space gives us is a way to look back and to rediscover ourselves. That's it. Thank you all for your attention. Thanks for coming with me on this journey today. And Ellen, any final questions or thoughts?
No, just thanks very much for your presentation. It was fascinating.
Thanks a lot. Appreciate it.
All right, we have a comment from one of the panelists. One of the attendees, Richard, who says it was a fantastic presentation. Thank you.
Thanks.
Any other questions or comments? You can raise your hand. You can type it in the Q&A. We're going to be wrapping up here in a quick second. Okay, I don't see any additional Q&As. I personally, Lynn, found it fantastic and fascinating. What you probably don't know is my father was an engineer with NASA for many years. Helped put a man on the moon with a slide rule.
Wow.
And a tiny little calculator, if that was even possible. But I actually have his slide rule and many shots of the moon and other space things. So for me, this was personal and timely. So
thanks a lot. Appreciate that comment. Yeah, I went to a presentation that NASA had put up on the mall for the anniversary of the moon landing. And I was astonished what they said about the fact that the average cell phone has way more computing power than they had back then when they did that. So, an extraordinary achievement, and great that your father was part of that.
Yep, that's so true. He used to say that all the time. All right, so I think I don't see more questions. I have another comment from Leslie Rowe. Thanks so much for this great presentation and the inspiring end. And I'm going to second that. That picture at the end was fantastic. A good reminder of our humanity.
Thank you all.
All right, and I think Mike, I'm going to invite you to restart your video. So that we can...
Okay, fine.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, Lynn. This was fascinating. It brought back a lot of my memories. I went with a high school buddy, drove to Cape Canaveral